And if you're following along all of the videos, the series that I'm doing, so the last class we talked about inheritance. Basically, we talked about class inheritance. No, we created multiple, no, we created base classes and multiple child classes and saw how we can use inheritance in C Sharp to reuse functionality from base classes, as well as like different things that we saw were how do we override functionality, how we can close classes for further extension using seal method. So if you have not seen the earlier video on inheritance, I'll suggest you go back and see the previous video, right? So in this video, we are going to talk about interfaces. And the major, and in the last video, we also talked about abstract classes. And one way to create abstract classes is all the methods of your class can also be abstract, right? So there could be like one question that you could have in your mind is, why should you bother about creating an interface anyways? You can always create an abstract class in which all the methods are abstract. So the major difference, and I think this comes from object-oriented programming, this is something that I usually follow. If I see an is a relationship between two entities, right? So for example, let's say animal and dog. So a dog is a animal, correct? So that's where I would use a base class and a child class, right? So that is where I would use class inheritance. But if I just have to make sure that one of my classes they have to behave in a certain manner, right? So there's no is a relationship, but they just want to I just want to make sure that this class supports this functionality. In that case, I'll go lean towards creating an interface. Okay, so let's take an example how we can create interfaces in C# and how we can implement those. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and create a class. So I'll just call it as flying. So I'll just select an interface, iflying.cs. All right. I have an interface here and I'm calling it as iflying, right? So any object that flies, basically I'm creating this interface so that they can comply by having these methods in that particular class. So let's say I have a method, let's say public void fly, right? A simple method. And actually, I don't even have to use public here. Definition. Okay. So if you see here, right, so I just went ahead and created a method, and the access specifier that I was using is public. So what it is telling me is the modifier public is not valid for item. Please use language version this or greater. Okay, so let's ignore 8.0 or not. So there are some changes that has come along with the C# 8.0, but with majority of the C# probably that you would be using. So in interfaces, right, actually we are not allowed to use any modifier, access modifier, because they are supposed to be public, right? Any class that would implement this interface has to have access to this, right? So there's no point of having a private method inside an interface. So that's the whole point of not having, that we are not able to use access modifiers here. So we'll keep it simple. We'll just create one interface and it has just one method. So let's now go ahead and create another class. And by the way, I'm just creating a new file for each of the class that I'm creating. You can always like create directly class in your program.cs classes file as well, right? So let's call this as aeroplane. Okay, so I have an aeroplane class and I want to implement iflying interface. So as soon as I try to do this, it says the compiler complains about that. Okay, I have to implement this interface. So I'll just say implement. So now it has copied over the definition of that, basically the syntax of that particular method, and it's for now it's just throwing a new not implemented exception. So I'll just say console.writeLine here. The aeroplane is flying. So let's have another class. I'll have another class, add class. Let's call it as bird class. And here also I'll implement iFlying interface, and I'll probably implement this interface. I'll do the same thing. I'll probably go back to my aeroplane class, copy this line. Control tab. I go back. I have to go back to the bird class. And yeah. So here I would just update this to say bird is flying. Okay, simple as that, right? So we have two classes, both of them, they inherit from iFlying class. Now if you see here, right, so aeroplane, there's no is a relationship between aeroplane and flying object, right? I can correct. It's just that aeroplane also flies and bird also flies. There's some common functionality that we want to use. We want to make sure that is implemented by both of these class. So we created an interface. We are calling it as iFlying. It has just one method, and the definition of those methods would directly lie inside those classes. Okay, so this is one reason that why we should create interfaces where you see there's no is a relationship, and you see that no, there's some sort of functionality that is needed in multiple classes, and you want to make sure they implement the same. Now, the second advantage that you get using interfaces is, let's say I have another class now. And this is a specific class for a Boeing aeroplane, right? So could be, I'll just call it as Boeing aeroplane. Now this Boeing aeroplane inherits from aeroplane, right? So that is there, but it could also implement iFlying class interface. So this is sort of multiple inheritance that you can achieve using interfaces, right? So now think about this, right? So now you have multiple type of classes, and now see aeroplane class in our case would actually, sorry, my F12 is not working. Let's close this. So now if I go back to aeroplane class, okay, so it could have multiple properties here, right? So let's say property, let's say 8, property string, I'll call it as name. Now, so these two properties, because I'm in my Boeing aeroplane class, I'm inheriting from aeroplane class. So both these properties would be available inside no, inside my Boeing aeroplane class. And so for now, what I'll do is I'll probably remove this. Let's have a few more methods here. Let's say public void. Let's see not just create a method, call it as is starting. So now this Boeing, yeah, so this is not defined here. I'll implement. So in this case, I can say either aeroplane is flying, or I can be specific and say Boeing aeroplane is flying. Okay. So now let's go back to program.cs. Let's create a new instance of Boeing aeroplane. Let's call it as Boeing aeroplane. B dot name equals to and B dot is weight equals to, it's an integer, so I'll just probably keep it as 3000. Okay, and now if you see here, I can call two methods here. I can either call fly, or I can also call start engine. And start engine method is actually coming from inheriting from aeroplane class, and the fly method is actually coming from implementing the interface. Okay, so let's quickly run this. Okay, so aeroplane is starting, Boeing aeroplane is flying. All right. Right. So let's just quickly summarize what we saw in this video. So in this video, we created how we can create an interface, right? So it's using the interface keyword, and then as part of the interface, we can have multiple methods. You can define multiple methods, and we cannot use access modifiers. We'll see later, probably when we do a review of C# 8 or later. In that, there's something called as default methods which we can use, in which you can also give some sort of definition of a particular method, right? But till C# 7, and usually I still want like to stick to interfaces like how we used to use them before, because it leads to less confusion, right? Because that's how we have been using, and if you are seeing a lot of code that's pre-existing, it's easier to understand, right? So now whatever class is going to implement this interface, in this case, our case, the Boeing aeroplane class was implementing this interface. In that case, we have to make sure that we have that method definition in this method, in this particular class. And then secondly, what we saw is using interfaces, you can also use multiple inheritance, right? It's a way to do multiple inheritance in C#, wherein you can inherit from a class, and then you can also implement some methods from another interface as well. And I think the major difference, as we talked about earlier, between abstract classes having all abstract methods and interface is the type of relationship that you're working with. If it's a relationship, usually prefer base classes and child classes. If it's not an is a relationship and you just want to reuse certain functionality in your class, it's always better to use interfaces. Okay. So that's all about interfaces. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.